Hello, and welcome to the CDO Magazine interview series. I'm Chris Nur, Chief Digital Officer of Cincinnati, a world leader in enterprise data software, and we're partnering with CDO Magazine, MIT CDO IQ, and the International Society of Chief Data Officers to bring you this series of interviews with thought leaders in data and analytics. Today, it's my pleasure to welcome to the podcast Brett Starr, the Vice President of Data and Machine Learning Engineering, Intelligent Automation, and Business Intelligence at Cincinnati Insurance Companies. Welcome, Brett. Great to meet you.
Hey, thanks for having me. Really appreciate the time today.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. So when I was preparing for our discussion, I checked your LinkedIn profile, which I normally do, and you have what I thought was one of the coolest descriptions of your organization and probably very accurate. And it goes from COBOL to the cloud, batch jobs to machine learning models, dashboards to chatbots, app dev to RPA. So tell us a little bit about how that description came about in context of your organization and your brief.
Sure. And I think like for many people, it's been a journey, and that journey has impacted my personal and professional experiences, but also that of our team. And that's helped shape this job description. Look, data is pervasive. It's a part of every initiative and every platform, every solution that we have going on in the company. So through that, our team ends up, with a seat at the table for all these different comings and goings. So you start to get a broad perspective on the different technologies and solutions that are at play, and you're finding ways that you can lean in and help. And so as the leader of our data engineering team, I just kind of found that I was part and parcel of pretty much every solution that we had in play. And that meant our legacy systems, so your old school, more mainframe based solutions that I think, most Fortune 1000 companies still have some remnants of, and our emerging technologies, and you have to live in both worlds. You have to be of two minds, where you're steeped in tradition on these well-formed paths, and you're bringing on disruptive, newly formed techniques and solutions. So kind of if I take that job description and I was like, hey, let's break it down a little further. How did that come to be? In that old school bucket, if I can use that term, like I mentioned before, I think I haven't come across a Fortune 1000 company that still doesn't have some mainframe or legacy footprint. And we still have, a shrinking but footprint there. So, with that portfolio and data pipelines and applications that some of which we developed in the 80s that we're continually pruning and replacing with more modern configurable engines, future-proofing our solution stack, that keeps me in the COBOL portion that you see there in that job description. And then through our evolution of data engineering, we've tapped into concepts and use of an enterprise canonical message like few companies that I've come across. And these canonical messages, they contain nearly every data element of value. It's placed in a common structure with a common label. That makes it easier for other consumers to know if they need data, irrespective of system, how they can go about and retrieve that data. Well, this effort springboards our ability to source analytics from a governed data pipeline. And so you have this governed data pipeline, and so working with these canonical messages, we found, the volume of messaging, maybe even the size of some of the messages, maybe don't lend themselves to some of the traditional solutions and architecture that you have in place. So that started to pull us into the big data space where we needed some more horsepower and something that can handle, different structured data types. So then that started to expand the job description and experiences, working with our canonical messages. Well, at the same time that we're doing that, we have this rapidly growing predictive modeling, data science, machine learning domain. This is in our actuarial department, our data science department, a department that our team serves. And I like to joke that we have more PhDs on the top floor than most universities. I mean, we've got a lot of really smart guys and gals that are working up there, and they're cranking out data mining and modeling and even to a certain degree, some software engineering concepts. And now you've moved into the big data space, but you find, gosh, I need something even more elastic. And an elastic, secure platform that can handle these dynamic workloads that help us win on analytics. So being the primary support organization from an environment and data provisioning engineering standpoint, that kind of brought us into the cloud, space. So, we started to evolve, and you start to see that as part of the job description, in your experience. And then in working with both our data scientists, but then also our analysts, which is another just growing community. And working with our analysts, you start to see the manual nature of some of our processes, not just the processes on the work that our analysts do when certain information is needed or a question needs answered, but also on just general processes throughout the organization. And by having kind of that line of sight, and then you combine it with, we have a lot of internal innovation efforts that we have. We have a strategic innovation group, but through these different innovation efforts and co-jams we host internally, we've started to experiment with different cloud offerings in the machine learning, chatbot, and automation space. And some of these seeds were planted, over the years, and then that led to the creation of an intelligent automation center of excellence, which our team leads and runs. And where we're focusing on enriching the lives of our associates, and we know that by enriching their lives, we'll be able to enrich the output and the service that we provide to our agents and customers. So, I know I rambled on quite a bit there, but it was just to kind of say, like, how did that job description come to be? And it was driven by data being in all things at our company, and then finding the problems that we needed to solve has kind of pulled us into some different technologies as we start to, slowly but surely let go of the past and reduce, some of that legacy footprint.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Well, that was very comprehensive. Thank you. And a lot packed into there. So the whole thing that you're describing is what, architecture folks would call a heterogeneous ecosystem, right? But in business terms, if you're a business executive and not a technologist, how one might explain that is, look, we have all kinds of data. We've got processes and technologies that are decades old, and then we've got these emerging things, and those have all got to coexist. And where the value comes from is getting one hand to talk to the other hand, to the third hand, to the fourth hand. So my business question is that resonating in terms of your business audience and having them actually understand why sort of the data engineering work is of value? The technical question, I'd love to just double click on the canonical message, because that's something that's fascinated me for decades. So maybe let's do the business question first and then come back to the canonical message and a little bit more about how you developed that and how you're using it.
Well, I think when you explain the value prop of portability and the different systems and components and solutions that you can blend together, if you leverage techniques like a canonical message or tap into microservices, but using APIs for integration. And if I'm using APIs, I need to have a common format for how these systems can talk to each other, or I haven't leveraged any benefit. So I think that comes across as common sense and pretty intuitive with our business customers. Now, where you seed that work and prioritize it, you may have some different views on where that would be versus new features that you're developing. But by getting the house in order and explaining how that can actually allow you to be more extensible and nimble in the future, you start to get that buy-in. I don't think any system's ever perfect. I mean, I love this one comment that a buddy on our team, and I don't know who he stole it from, so I apologize, I forget that. But he said, sometimes in IT, you're trading big problems for small problems, right? And you're getting rid of that big problem, but you've added a new level of complexity, or you've had to do some trade-offs on your prioritization. And I think, that's when you're implementing any foundational technology, you may say, hey, we're not going to take a shortcut for this one particular solution so that we get all this long-term value. Other times you go the other way. You say, hey, I'm going to go tactical and take a shortcut approach, but I'm going to come back and do the hardening there.
Yeah, I think that's key. And I think maybe we'll come back to this, but I think it was about 10 years ago, it occurred to me that enterprise architecture is a lot like urban planning, right? So it's like you have these, if you're in Cincinnati, right? And there's a river through the middle of the city. It's not like you're going to move the river. Okay, well, they did do that in Chicago, as you probably know, but that was, it's like, that's not something that you do every day. So you work with the legacy constraints, and you're right. Fortune 1000 companies, almost all of them still have AS400s and COBOLs. If they're companies that make things, they're generally heavy EDI users, and all of that has got to, coexist with the up and coming stuff. Maybe to go back to the canonical message, because what I love about what you're saying is that you've gone right to the heart of this challenge in the heterogeneous ecosystem of data interoperability, data standards, and governance, and kind of instantiated that through that message structure. Just if you can share a little bit about how you came up with that. Did it have some elements of what's sometimes called schema on read as well as schema on write, so that it was somewhat before the fact and somewhat after the fact in terms of ingesting different data sources and different signals from different data sources? And then also, is that built in middleware? Is it built in cloud technologies or data lake type technologies? Does it span a couple of those?
Yeah, let's unpack that a little bit, and maybe to just start at the beginning of it. How did we get into the canonical messaging game? Well, when our CIO came on board, who is an architect at his core, he knew the value of bringing in the interoperability and having a component-based architecture, a service-oriented architecture, what that can do for your entire ecosystem over the long haul. So that was almost a battle cry from the very beginning on how important it was for us to leverage a canonical message and come up with a common standard for how systems would communicate. I think every company has probably seen a diagram in some, IT presentation where it looked like, the subway sewer map, or, the spaghetti chart, or, put in your typical choice of what you want to call it. But what it showed in those examples were just an overwhelming number of point-to-point solutions. And, I could talk for days about, the challenges in dealing with point-to-point solutions. But I think the big thing to start off is that we had a leader at the top who knew the value, had the stomach and the fortitude to stick with it, because it's not for the weak of heart, right? You actually have to bring people together and come up with these common standards. You have to kind of lean into the process and say, this is how we're going to structure it, this is how we're going to label it, and this is what it means. But you also have to have someone then and multiple people that can speak to when you put this work in. Now you're going to be free to look at new systems and third-party, vendors and partners and best-of-breed components, and developing your own components and be able to more seamlessly integrate these systems, because they just have to map to one standard. You map to one standard, and all of your consumption use cases, all of your sharing that needs to happen across your ecosystem will now be streamlined. And it for sure is that pay me now, pay me later example. And so as you onboard new solutions and new providers, which I got to tell you, not just new solutions, in our company, but new data providers, just the rich ecosystem of all these third-party API systems that we can be tapping into to get better at what we do. Leveraging this messaging standard gives you a leg up for consistent acquisition, development, and consumption. And we are seeing these niche offerings just pop up left and right by a line of business or a particular business process. Whether I'm talking about loss control or home inspections or something to do with key accounts, these niche products are starting to bubble up. And there's a strong push for, I think, every IT department, every company to become more API-driven microservice architectures. And if you're going to have that, you need a messaging standard in order to be successful. And this can bring a lot of diversity into your solution portfolio. And I think that diversity is going to continue to grow more and more. So the benefit from having a canonical messaging standard is going to pay for itself 1, 5, 10 times over as we start to move down the road. I think the days of having a single provider, almost irrespective of industry, and I'm certainly talking out of school a little bit because I work at an insurance company, but just looking at the technology landscape, I think that single provider, alpha to omega, type ERP, all-encompassing ERP, I think that is going away, and we'll see that less and less often. And so we need to be able to leverage concepts around components and engines. And the more that we make our components, configuration-driven engines, the more adaptable we can be to new players on our team, talking from a technology solution perspective. So I think that was kind of the vision set, and we all bought into it, and we are seeing the lift of it. And now you asked maybe some more specific questions on how are we implementing that canonical message. And I don't know if you want me to pause or you want me just to keep going.
Well, no. Yeah. I mean, just to build on what you said, I think there are a couple of really good observations. And just for, this has come up in a number of my conversations with analytics and data leaders, is that there's kind of a new emerging best in breed strategy, right? So the idea of one-stop shopping, and certainly depending on the industry, obviously ERP remains critically important, SAP and Oracle and so on, but there is no one-stop shopping. I think the other thing that's very interesting that you bring up that just is maybe a point of reference for our audience is I've spent a fair amount of time talking about the boundaries of the enterprise with respect to data. So internally produced versus externally produced data. Now, the insurance industry is interesting because since the beginning of time, right, you're heavily reliant on third-party data in a way that, in some industries, it's not that important. In some industries, it's important, but it tends to be more siloed. I would represent, not that I'm an insurance expert, but it's pretty ubiquitous, right? So some of what you're articulating just in terms of extensibility, kind of a suggestion for leaders who are not in the insurance industry is this is a good model because companies like obviously what we're hearing from Brett, you've kind of figured out how to do this in a way that allows you to assimilate both niche applications and third-party data sources in a way that's at scale to kind of drive your business. To maybe just play back a little bit of what I heard in that, and I definitely share those observations. Yeah, but if you could, just double click a little bit more into how you implemented it, and just in terms of like, technology versus business process versus data governance, how is it defined, and so on, and middleware versus data lake, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, so there's a lot of topics that we could get into here, but I'll start on the messaging front. So, there are a number of standards organizations in different industries, and one that's a major player in insurance is called Accord. Yep. And Accord had a canonical messaging standard it was kind of a stone soup. It was contributed, from IBM and Oracle and some other companies kind of contributed collateral to this canonical messaging format. And then they socialized it and worked with other carriers and were able to round out, kind of a set standard and even a downstream data model that you could look to implement. So that was our starting point. Our starting point was leveraging, a standard that can be used throughout the industry, because it's about portability, not just portability in our walls, but portability with our partner ecosystem as well. So we're going through and we're starting to work on this standard. And again, I don't know if I'm going down too many rabbit holes here, but then you have to have a decent amount of dialogue to make sure that you understand the structures and the labels that you have in your message map to the physical data that's stored in that database that then maps semantically to what the business user believes they mean. You have to create that linkage between them. And there are data exhibits that you're creating. Then you are also having dialogue to kind of land on this common understanding. So in the beginning, there's a decent amount of analysis and requirement work. But the upside of this, which, I shouldn't put a button there, but, some people are like, oh, I don't want anything that sounds waterfall or sounds like it could, take too long. And I'm not trying to paint a picture of that, because you can break apart concepts and subject areas. You could do it on agents or on location or certain parts of an agreement that you want to focus on. But the big thing I wanted to bring out about it is it starts to gain velocity because you find commonality on what you did with your first round, your first system that you're onboarding. So through that commonality, your second system won't take as long for you to start to govern and map to your standard. Your third system won't take as long, your fourth system. So you start to build this velocity in how you can onboard systems that over time, then you have this pretty established standard that no longer do you have to go through these exercises of dialogue to help a new system on board as much as you're presenting your standard. Yeah. And your standard now has been documented and defined well enough that people understand what they need to map to. So then I think some of your other questions were around, like, well, what are the technologies that we're using and what are the patterns? And that has evolved too. In the very beginning, we put a bit more of the onus on the source system to create an output in XML that mapped to the standard that we agreed upon. Over time, as we got more systems coming on board, we created a central facility that will do that transformation for them. We found a lot of the systems that we work with already have a mechanism and a transactional trigger to go ahead and submit an XML or JSON message. It just might not be in the format or the structure that we need it to be. But if it matches the granularity that we're looking for, we can create a mapping service because we understand our standard, and we can have some partnership with that system SME or business SME, whomever we need to partner with. And now we can provide that mapping service. And so part of that message submission is then translating it to the common standard and schema. And then we store that in an operational data store. And all of your consumption now is from this operational data store that we can size, we can use different platforms depending on the use cases that we need to support. And no longer do people need to go and knock on the door of that particular source system. That source system, they can do what they do great. And they don't have to worry about supporting all the needs of everyone else has of what their system does. That moves on to this operational data store. And now all the points of entry and request are through an enterprise messaging system, leveraging a pub sub pattern, where you say, oh, hey, you had an event. I do care about this event. Yeah. Now I'm going to ask for that event from your operational data store so I can now use it in the way that I need to use it for. So you bring common patterns of consumption and portability to bring in new systems on, and you push any of that operational burden to a separate architectural and infrastructure component. You're not beating up on those source systems for things that don't relate to their primary core mission. That now is offloaded to another piece of your architecture.
I love this conversation, Brett. I think it's it's interesting to me because I did a bunch of work probably 15 years ago in middleware, and middleware was and it sort of has ended up, I think, being a little bit overlooked. But what I love about what you're saying, like there are a lot of companies now that have this problem that they've made big sort of data lake, data cloud investments, and then they turn into data swamps. And I think what I'm hearing is you've sort of leapfrogged that a bit by really being tight on the standards up front so that you don't end up with, I've got all these terabytes of data, but there's really I don't know if it's any good or not, or there's no way to access it because you've gated it a little bit. And to your point, that doesn't mean that it's this big, sort of monolithic waterfall thing that can still be worked in an agile way to deliver value over time. So now I think I really appreciated how deep we went into this today. Maybe in closing, if I can put you on the spot and say okay, so all of this, and it's amazing. And I think very inspirational in terms of what you've been able to build and, your CIO, any, key predictions for sort of a 3 to 5 year horizon as it relates to, either the insurance industry, technology, anything else?
Yeah, if I were going to talk about something that I think would be some game changer influences on the way that we work with data, there's a few things I'd call out. Regulation. I mean, I don't want to be the boring guy that brings up regulation having a pervasive impact, but we're seeing an ever-growing and changing landscape of the type of requirements that we need around data privacy and security. Yeah. And that can impact how we support our analyst partners, our data scientists. How do we create those data pipelines, and where do we need to move those workloads? I think we, like many companies, we have fantastic security and wonderful security models and all sorts of monitoring in place. But now there'll be a regulatory requirement that will continue to grow, that it's not just what do you have in place, but how well is that documented, and can you tell that story? I think that's going to have an impact on how we create solutions. I think that's going to have an impact on even how we staff teams and how we win on analytics in the future. Yeah. I also think, I'm sorry, do you want to?
Just to interject on that, I think that I completely agree. I mean, that's emerging in importance. And, even I would guess you'd probably tell me that the adjudication is not always clear between the different requirements, like, state, federal jurisdiction. For international companies, the situation's even worse, right? Where you can have, regulatory bodies in different countries that will, in some cases, have contradictory or conflicting requirements. So this is definitely a big emerging area of attention.
And we always like to say in insurance, which I work in, and maybe bankers would say, You're talking a big game there, sir. But we like to say, it's more complicated in insurance and financial services because we're regulated at the state, but you also have federal agencies that you have to comply with, and if you have international exposure, you'll have international agencies that you have to comply with, and so you have to be able to satisfy the requirements of I guess I'd say the lowest common denominator.
Yep.
What one state asks for, then you're going to have that type of onus on your team and your solutions to be able to do that work. So that's kind of maybe that's a little bit more the boring side about the 3 to 5 years in the future. I think in the exciting side is that we're going to continue to see the powerful platforms find their ways into the hands of our analyst community. So this concept around democratization, of data, of analytics, of machine learning, of creating your own automations, I think that is going to continue to grow because the platforms are going to be powerful enough that your analyst or your frontline workers aren't limited to Excel on how they can answer questions. So I think there is, not too far from now, virtual agents that are writing right next to you, that can use, voice over text, or they're looking at what's on your screen, and then they are providing insights in real time or near real time. They're going ahead and kicking off processes, knowing that you have either a meeting you need to schedule, a follow-up, a form that needs filled out. They are going ahead and helping you do your work more consistently and efficiently. They're bringing analytics to you to help you make that judgment call, to help make that decision. So I think there'll be this augmented virtual assistant that will be with you through almost every step of the way. And what we do in the data space is going to drive a lot of it. I'm pretty excited about what the next 5 years can hold in that regard.
That is awesome. And it is inspirational. I hope that in addition to all that, the augmented assistant can help me with my PowerPoints, which I still spend too much time doing. Super, Brett. So nice to meet you. Thanks for joining me today. I really enjoyed our conversation. And again, I appreciate we went, really deep into an area that I think sometimes doesn't get enough attention, and really is critical to driving a data culture and results. So thanks again. I hope you have a terrific rest of the day.
Really enjoyed the time with you, Chris, and I wish you a great day as well.